Jeannine, it is such a pleasure to have you here with us in our May 2016 Legacy Leadership Institute and Facilitator Certification in Dallas. And so happy that you could be home in order to join us for 2 days, which is a special treat, and also to have this opportunity to speak for a few minutes with you and to have you be able to answer some questions from our attendees. And we're just going to take a moment to scan a look at them as they're taking pictures of us. Thank
That's
you.
the technology of today. I take a picture of you, I take a picture of me.
And we're not doing any selfies.
Well, it is good to be home, and I thank you guys, you and Gary, for choosing Dallas as the location to have this. Most of the time, I can't get to the institutes because they are scattered around the world. And I left a conference yesterday early to get in, take a quick bath, and come right here.
Legacy leaders are nothing if not flexible.
Yeah.
So we'd like to begin by asking a couple of questions of you and then have you respond and share with us the kinds of things that were very important in the vision, the inspiration, and the inception of Legacy Leadership. So could you take a few minutes just to tell us the story of how was Legacy Leadership created?
When you texted me last night, you were going to ask me that question. I was glad you didn't hear what I said. Because it was like, Brenda, do we have 5 hours to do this? Because the entire thing, you only gave us 30 minutes. So I actually had to jump from being a child, where I honestly believe this started, with my natural instincts for curiosity and for not accepting the status quo. Some of you heard me say this before, that as a young girl, Mother would put me to bed before daylight, before dark. It was still daylight. I remember pulling the curtains back and looking out and watching the sunset. She was exhausted. I had so many questions that I asked all the time. Why this? How come that? It's always been done that way. Why don't we do it somehow differently? And that curiosity, some people call it nosiness, that followed me throughout growing up and into my education, into my being able to live and work, teach around the world. What I found with my partner, Lee Smith, it's about 25 years ago. We were talking about needing a leadership model to take into one of our client companies. And as we discussed those models, we kept finding rigidity. We kept finding things that was like, yes, this is a prescription. Do it this way. And that's where my rebel started coming out, and my curiosity. Well, why that? Why not this? Why couldn't we do something over here? And it actually got really, really creative during one particular training time that Lee and I were in England. We had just done a Train the Trainer for the coaching clinic in London, and we were going out to another client's location out on the coast of England. And we just got to being silly. We happened to have been sitting on one of the Virgin trains. So I started teasing Lee to move to where I could see that on the back of her chair. So I took a picture saying we now are in Virgin territory. We're going to start creating something new that we would like to have as part of our work if we had this whiteboard and we could make it from scratch, not knowing that's really what we were doing. So we had the back of a piece of paper we had with us there, and we started just thinking out concepts. What would we know? Lee's doctorate and research had been in organizational development, so she had a lot of systems work behind her. My doctorate had been on an individual perspective of what makes people work. Mm-hmm. Now, we both had some of the other, but when we put those two together, she was always looking from a systems connection point. I was looking from individual behaviors inside of that system, recognizing, from what I've already showed you, that I was the one always pushing against that system. As the individual, I wanted the flexibility to be unique, even inside of that system. So we just started jotting notes, and before long we set them aside and went on back to whatever we were doing. The next time we were in Boston at another conference, and we found ourselves in the middle of the night, not able to sleep. We'd been talking, laughing about something, so we just started papering the wall with note paper. And at the end of that almost all-night session, we had something that we called then the workout track. And the workout track had all sorts of different stations where we were trying to figure out what kind of exercises we were going to do that would enhance our leadership muscles. And so we played with this for quite a few years. We actually did presentations at international coaching events and leadership conferences. And it got enough traction that as researchers, we sat back and said, we may have something here. It brings the individual, their uniqueness, and gives a context of a system around it. And it was that trip that I've used, you've heard the story of our writing on the back of napkins. We actually were in, I think it was the Boston airport, and all we had with us were just napkins, and we started pulling it off of different tables and began to actually write some of the core concepts that ended up being what we had tested and turning into the Legacy leadership model. There were multiple concepts, multiple descriptors, and in working with folks for almost 5 years, we actually narrowed that down, that embedded within the 5 best practices. They each have 3 components. So there's actually 15 core foundational pieces inside of those 5 best practices. In the assessments, the LLCI, the Legacy Leadership Competency Inventory, we started having researched most of the assessments for other tried and true leadership models. Took those and said, what resonates with us? And from the work we've done in teaching and training, for at that point somewhere between, I don't know, maybe total both of our experiences, even then it was probably 30 years of platform, OD, individual coaching, teaching, and training. But we said, what resonates here? What language would we use? And that then is what we started by the broader field research that we then started using with our clients. So it came from our own struggle in finding a business or a leadership model that both had the constructs that we felt were broad enough and at the same time left the flexibility that someone could be themselves, whether it's an individual, a work team, or an organization. So that's a lot of words to actually say. We came from leadership models that weren't working for us, where we had been using them in organizations with individuals and kept bumping up against a wall. Mm-hmm. Most of it had to do with flexibility. Mm-hmm. So we stepped back and said, let's just start from our workout track to our list of the components we would like ideally in one, mm-hmm. and narrow that down and see what actually works. So from 1990 to 1995, we were testing this with our clients. And from 95 to 2000 then, we actually formulated it and started using it in the marketplace. And I think when we first met in 2000, 2001, was when it had begun to go global with pieces that were solid, had been field tested, and it has just mushroomed from that.
Thank you. And speaking of flexibility, when you first described the Legacy Leadership model as a model, a structure, a framework inside which other leadership approaches, tools, yes. methods can live, mm-hmm. can you speak a little bit about that?
When we were talking with some of our first major corporate clients, names you guys would know, many of the organizational development specialists would say, we're already using XYZ, mm-hmm. or we have this assessment from ABC. We like this. It works here. The company knows it. We don't want to throw it out. Mm-hmm. And I can remember doing a company on the West Coast. They had several of these models that they've been using quite successfully. And we said, that's fine. There's a place for that inside of one of these 5 best practices where that specificity can actually be the technique that helps people understand how to implement and live within a particular one. I think this one would fit in our, probably the best practice 5, the one for accountability, that they had particular models from others that they were using. So we ended up using this humongous spreadsheet that took all 15 of our components that were into the 5 best practices and fitting underneath that the tools, the techniques that others were using, and saying it just fits right here. You just simply know that you do not throw anything out. Mm-hmm. That the value for legacy leadership is it can become that construct mm-hmm. through which or into which or on which other pieces of technology, particular systems can fit.
Can live.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So having said that and gone from the creation to building it, putting it together, we now come to the visual of the 5 best practices.
Yes.
And so can you tell us a little bit about how did it come in its design, with the structure, with the 5 best practices as it appears? And then also a little bit about the how did you choose the colors?
I can start with the last one, easy, the colors. Our designer found the colors. As we were looking at things and talking about stuff, she just got really tickled with us. She says, what's so obvious is that we work in primary colors, that we were clear, we're out there. They have real distinctions in the way that we would talk or work or coach even. So she saw definitive, strong colors, and she saw definitive lines. And even though within that there was flexibility, she wanted, and after a good bit of debate, discussion, argument, she actually was able to show us some very strong reasons as to why this would fit. And they're being primary colors, they literally will fit any culture in the world as well. So there's going to be different connections with different colors. Some are going to be used more than others, but it ended up being, we didn't plan it this way. I'd like to say we did. We weren't that wise. But it unfolded as being something that can be very easily remembered and has a fit regardless of the company color, the company culture, the organization, the individuals. It's turned out to be a global, accidental, fabulous thing. Now the design of it was also interesting because we probably started with best practice 3 when we were looking at how to fine tune and how to bring together something that we called a leadership model, realizing that the heart of leadership truly is the heart. And when we're looking at other models, they often had leadership kind of along the edges of those models, where we felt the attraction of leadership and not necessarily traditional definitions of leadership. But a leader, when you come down to it, is an inspirational model from their life, who they are, how they move through the world, that attracts others to them and has people willing to listen to them. So at some point along the line, we just kept having these either 3 a.m. conversations or 3 p.m. afternoon around a swimming pool. It seems like that's where all of our wisdom came from, just happened at the clock at 3. And we chose to have that as the heart. The next thing we actually went to was realizing, all right, if this is the heart of it, where do you start? You start by casting the vision. Why am I here? What's my purpose? What do I want to accomplish? And why does this organization exist? Somebody had a vision, they had a dream, they had a hope, or that organization wouldn't exist. So that became the best practice 1. We start with where we want to go, why are we here, then how do you know you're successful? It's by the opposite of that. At some point you're looking back on history. The vision, you're casting the future. At some point you're looking back on history. Has this really succeeded? Have I done what I intended to do? And if so, how well? So that became best practice 5, the accountability and the responsibility. Did I get to where I was going? And how successful was I? And if not, is it the leadership where's the gap? Or is my vision not accurate? Now how then do those be calibrated? I can't do this in a vacuum, which then created what became the arms of working with the people and having the culture, having these things be what really then fed into the core of my vision, the leadership, and the results. So I'd like to say we just sat down and designed it, but it actually unfolded over those 5 years that we were really testing it and getting the responses until finally it got pretty crystal clear for us. But that was the design that gave flexibility. Because if you look at that, and as you guys continue to talk through it and work with it, you can enter the model at any one of the 5 points. So
The
that
legacy
became
doorway.
a marketing standpoint also. If somebody says, we've just completed a leadership model, we've just gone through 2 years of ... then our questions naturally became, well, what's the results of that? Oh, we don't have the really qualified results of what we thought we were going to have. Well, let's look at legacy leadership through best practice 5. Why don't you have the results? Do you need to take back in and then tweak some of the training around your current leadership model, which would fit into best practice 3? And so that has been one of the really unique pieces of legacy leadership, is the fact that you could enter the model through any one of the 5 points, I'll call it now, or 5 best practices. And you've got the flexibility then in each one of those of where is the real gap. Stay back with best practice 5. Is it the accountability piece that hasn't been calibrated? Do we not have the folks who have the real responsibility and I really know who's responsible for what and accountable to? So it gives you just literally almost 15 points or 15 places that you can start to enter the model and the discussion before laying out the entire framework.
Well, thank you. And I'd like to touch again on that word flexibility. One of the things that has been so wonderful in the 16 years that I've been working with you around legacy leadership is the flexibility, the appreciation for new input, and the possibility to continue to evolve the model. In Spiral Dynamics, they call it include and transcend.
Yeah.
And that you have been so available and so welcoming of the ways that we come up with, maybe delivering a little bit differently or incorporating something else. And that's always been a very rich piece for us as facilitators and making us feel very valued by you. So as a visionary, and because sometimes people have a vision, and one of our participants said, what's the difference between holding a vision and choking a vision?
Yes.
So you've held that vision so beautifully and so gracefully. And as the visionary, being open to other people coming in, kind of messing with your ideas and so forth, how has you, as the visionary, do you see the future of legacy leadership, as much as you could say?
The huge vision would be, I'd love to go back to the very first training. Somebody asked Lee and I what our vision was. My answer now is the same as it was 16 years ago. The vision, the hope, the prayer is that there would be at least one legacy leader in every organization throughout the world. So we've got a lot of work yet to do. The thing that has stayed steady through these 16 years is we constantly realize that the foundation is still as current as it was 20 years ago when we were still looking at what was missing. That the core pieces, the core foundations, they don't change. We made the model, realized it then very intentionally, we want it to be scalable. It could shrink in tough times. It can expand in really good times. It can be reinterpreted as to the current culture or the current feelings of, I'll just use the phrase, corporate America. So if a particular word has a shift in its interpretation, how does that impact the model? How are you able to be flexible within that? What we've not been flexible on is this. There's been no shift in the core principles and the core 5 best practices. We keep testing them, and they still keep working and ringing true. How it's delivered, what kind of examples are used, what kind of experiences in the room. If I had been teaching it the same way every week for 15 years, I would be bored out of my mind. So why would I expect anybody else to do the same thing? So the request always has been is learn the core, make the core yours. So we couldn't tell if it was you teaching, me teaching, or anyone else here teaching. The core foundational pieces are the core wisdom and the value of the model. Then how we adapt the application of that is what makes it ongoingly flexible.
So if I can say it in a different way that is your way, as facilitators of legacy leadership, it's important for us to get legacy leadership in our bones. And then once it's in our bones, the way that we deliver it, the way we speak about it, can be anything, because it always will come from that very strong core. I've always loved that term, never heard it from anybody else, have legacy in our bones. So is there anything else that you'd like to add before we go to questions?
There have been 2 or 3 salient points over the years that also make this model different. One we've already talked about is the flexibility of it, because when we were researching, as far back as 20 years ago, some of the very standard, well-known models, and we would talk to some of those authors. Before we got crazy enough to start crafting this one, we actually wanted to do some adaptations of current models that were already well-known. And the answers kept coming back, no, this is, my word's not there, the formula, the prescription. It has to be done this way. Mm-hmm. And that young little girl rebel would just say, I won't work that way. Mm-hmm. The majority of the adults I've worked with won't just accept it that way. So the flexibility that it was lasting but could be adapted within that was one of the key principles. And then the next principle was the fact that I like to leverage things. I don't want to pay for just one outfit and can only wear it one way. I don't want the company to buy one model or train only one level of people and have that be their investment. So the second thing that began to really evolve that we have stayed concrete on is this is a model that has a 3-generational thumbprint. We teach to the leaders in the room their assignments, their homeworks, the expectations as they mentor, teach, coach, model what they're learning to their direct reports with the expectations that those direct reports will model it for theirs. So I want an organization, even an individual, to think I'm getting 3 levels of bang for my buck. And then the last one really being that that thumbprint is not a doing. It's a being. It's who I be in the world as a leader. That you've heard me say over the years, everyone that we meet, everyone sitting in any room is a leader, whether they recognize it or not. Because when you think about influence, every one of us influences how many people every single day as we walk through the world. Whether it's our spouse, our children, the person we meet on the subway, the person we meet in the airport line. You cannot not influence somebody by your attitude or your behavior. So we would invite folks to be conscious about who they are as they move through the world, recognizing that, aware of it or not, you are 24/7 a leader.
Thank you. It speaks to me of the distinction of legacy leadership from some other ways of leading, a people-centric, relationship-rich way of leading, and all about the succession of leaders developing leaders, so pertinent in this time of the generational shift from the boomers to the next generation of people who will be leading the companies, and we've been talking a lot about that in this institute.
And you live your legacy in real life versus leave it days or decades later. So somebody's talking about every one of us right now. We're somebody's gossip at this moment. Mm-hmm. So what are they saying about who we are and our brand or our leadership gossip?
So thank you very much for this, setting the table in such a beautiful way. And now I can see toes tapping of people saying, I have a question. So please raise your hand if you have a question. We'll acknowledge you, and Tony will assure that we have eyes on you as you ask your question of Jeannine. So make sure your hair is combed. And
Just
that the fashion police have got you all organized. Who has a question?
Well, Brenda, you may have asked such brilliant questions that maybe there's nothing else right now.
I'd be surprised.
I do too. Are you telling me these folks are shy? I don't think so.
No, we're not shy. You answered my question, which is why I'm being looked at. My question yesterday was in terms of the order, numerical order,
yes,
which is in your design.
Yes.
You're intentionally 1, 2, 3, then 4 and 5.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not taught in that order. It's taught
Right.
1, 5. But you answered that.
Yeah.
You did a beautiful job of answering it. So I see no need to ask it again. Thank you for answering it before I asked it.
As you have brought that up again, this is not going to surprise you the more that you learn about me. It's also an intentional pattern interruption. I don't want anyone in the room assuming that they're going to go a habitual way that we always go about life. So some exercises, if you're right-footed, I'm going to ask you to start on your left. If you're used to shaking hands with your right hand, I'm going to ask you to shake hands with your left. It's a way to upset, literally, our body chemistry so that we learn differently. So just the fact it is that way was actually an adult learning technique as well behind what I'm talking about, the design of the design. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions?
Couple.
Yes.
What do you see having now? It's been taught around the world,
Yes.
Delivered around the world, and different people do it in different ways. I mean, they keep the core foundational
Yes.
principles. What would you say might be valuable to add as far as how it's delivered or how it's received, or tools that we might need?
I actually have a fear around adding too many more tools. One of the very, very solid, in fact more than one, leadership models over the years has just literally been taught around the world is so tool-based. You go through this and you go through that and you go through the others, and I find later people can refer to the tool, but they've forgotten the core concepts. So one of the things that we watch, even with all the variety that you guys are experiencing now, is actually there anything needs to be pulled out? Are we overwhelming with tools and techniques? Are we spending too much time on the hows and the doing versus really getting to have that internal being of who does this leader be? So I'm actually at the point where I'm doing just the opposite, John. I'm looking at what needs to be pulled out that might have been relevant 10 years ago before it's now in the lexicon of leaders or in cultures that may not be needed. So I would encourage all of you to watch both sides of that as you take this into your own organizations, whether you live it or whether you're taking it then into organizations. Is there a process, a way that will teach best practice 3 better with this group of people? Let's use it. But let's don't assume that that's going to be something we're going to add on to every single one. We want it to be such that folks can ideally remember the 5 best practices as a way of being in life. Now, we've got the whole technology piece. So Brenda and Gary in the past 2 years have been piloting how can this be taught virtually. What I love about that is how the speed of this then could actually get around the world, distinct from the way that we've had to do it the past 5, 10, 15 years, face by face, little by little. Then we went to teleclasses. We've been doing it teleclass. But now, as Brenda and Gary have been adding to it a virtual face-to-face, whether we're using whichever the technologies and programs, that's one of the places that there is going to be, John, an ongoing, how do we take and adapt without losing the core interactions? Because we're all practicing the being part of it when we're here together. But how do we use technology but help folks shift attitudes, behaviors, habits in their being so they actually leave a training with more of a legacy leadership blood type than they may have come in with. Now, I'm confident the head learning can happen that way. That's the easy part. You know, 105 years ago when I was writing code and was writing these programs in BASIC, I could get the head knowledge of those training programs down. But I remember I was talking with a senior executive at Coca-Cola in Atlanta decades ago, and we were bemoaning the fact that it didn't get any further down. They came out of the trainings with the head knowledge and could talk a good game, but we didn't see their hands shifting to do things differently, and we didn't tend to last. So somewhere in here, there's an answer. But how do we have the being and the experiential part be such a part of modern technology that we don't need locations, we don't need walls, we're just able to have a virtual time together.
And this is a transition time from the physical to the virtual, and
Yes.
it is indeed a challenge. I've been working in virtual space for many years, as you know, and it is a challenge to have heart space in virtual space. But beginning with people's familiarity with how to be in virtual space, and then just the particular experience of being with other people in 3D in a room.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a challenge. We're up to the challenge, and it is evolving all the time, isn't it? So Richard, you have a question.
And Jeannine would like to follow up on the being part, which I'm really impressed. The emphasis on the leader,
Yes.
the being. And I would like to hear your comments on, often I encounter this, the question on ROI, the return on investment. Almost a kind of exclusive, or should I say mutually exclusive situation where if I want the benefits of legacy leadership quickly, I want the return on investment. On the other hand, I'm told that I will have to build on my being rather than focusing on the doing. It seems to slow them down. Yeah. Could you say something on that?
It's a very good observation. I have a drama background. I've been on stage and been in musicals. And one of the things that I always loved came from Anna and the King of Siam. If I fool the people I fear, I fool myself as well. Now, I wanted to re-language that a bit, what we're talking about. When she said fool in that, she was actually meaning if I practice, if I act as if. So I want to be sure that we're understanding the definition of how Anna meant that. And it's almost the same thing here, Richard. To get the ROI, to get the return, I will have a leader focus on a project, something that's already on their performance management. There's a goal, an objective that organization, that department, that individual has to have. And then we'll actually create options, create scenarios. How could I do this differently such that the results get pretty quickly where I'm trying to go? So I actually start with the how and the what in our conversation and our design. Then I'm going to move it, coach-like, into, so, Mr. X, how will you have to act differently for the results to be different? And we begin to talk about then what becomes that being part. But they may not be comfortable in doing that. And we've got that timeline to show results. So this is the practicality and also the flexibility that I will use as well. It's just simply finding what has to be delivered by when, it looks like what, and then the actual side-by-side work or timeline work is in working at the being part, the core leadership shift of how they hold themselves as a leader that's different than what they were doing before. So all of us get to be bilingual in that standpoint of actually thinking about how do we accomplish the result that's required, that's the reality, and help folks understand the fullness of their life, what it can be, and the impact on the company by the being portion becoming a different anchor for them.
Thank you. Olivia, you have another question.
I do, and I'd like to preface it with, I'm not interested in your politics, but I am interested in what your perspective is on the leadership models, best practices that you are teaching and that you are trying to integrate across the world, and how that's playing out in our politics, in the leaders that we are seeing today, and how they are approaching leadership.
I love that you asked the question, and my answer is so easy. I have no answer.
So you would say then you're not pleased with what you're seeing, or are you disappointed in what you're seeing?
Both.
Okay.
I think, having been blessed to live around the world, I actually find myself thinking, what is the world thinking of us right now?
Thank you.
And I don't know whether it doesn't really matter what level of politics. We can go into almost any organization, any city, look at business practices. It's as if throughout, and it isn't just our country, it really is much of the world now, that we have lost the core values of leadership and what it means. And we're either chasing profit, or we're chasing politics, or we're chasing it my way is better than your way, because you don't act like me, you're whatever. If I could, there's a lot out there that we could call broken. I really prefer my best. This doesn't work for me all the time because I get so irritated with what I see so often, but if I can keep the context up, look at the opportunities. How could we take our sphere of influence and model, teach, who knows what that could happen, what impact. So I truly do not have the answer. There is not an answer that's good at this point. It comes back then, what can we individually do within our belief systems, our politics, our sphere of influence? And I think it's actually gotten bigger now than we used to. We used to have these conversations. We would say, well, look around the room. At a minimum, every one of us has 200 connections. Now, with technology, that's been multiplied. I don't even know what's being estimated now. But if we're sitting here, we'll say, with 20 people in the room times 200, what's our influence on a minimum scale? We take it up into the probably 1,000 by our contacts, our impacts, and on its. If we became known as, since we're sitting at Legacy Leadership Workshop, I would say if we became known as a legacy leader who walks and demonstrates these 5 best practices, what kind of influence might we have on those around us? And that comes back to the distinction of living our legacy rather than leaving it. It's just being aware that we cannot not influence. And what I'm doing or not doing is impacting someone. That's scary.
And what we leave is what we live every day anyway, yes?
Mm-hmm.
We have a question from over here? Yes, Gerald.
Again, thank you again for all the work you and your colleagues have put into this amazing product. It's really a blessing to many people. My question is, we talked earlier about the challenges and maybe opportunities with the technology side. Mm-hmm. What about translating the material? Have any talks been brought up about translating the material in other languages? Because I do a lot of work, and I know other people here do the same, and it could be helpful.
We've had several conversations over the years from several of the Asian languages to South American languages to Central European languages. We have found 2 things so far. Most of the folks in these countries that are in businesses have had to study English as it being the global business language. So we've got colleagues now in Romania that are teaching workshops right now with Legacy Leadership. And at first they thought it was going to be a real challenge. What they have found, it may change the rhythm of delivery. It might need to be a bit more conscious, a bit more slow. The examples may need to be changed. But they have not found any difficulty in getting the core principles solidified. We were teaching in Korea a decade ago, and we had a translator that we actually taught it in English, and our translator, of course, translated it into the local dialect. And as we went further into that, more and more of the folks got comfortable to start using their high school English in some of the dialogue. So it became really a blend of bilingual in the room. Jumping on South America, one of the companies was wanting to completely translate it, but they didn't choose to put the resources into it because with their ROI analysis, they felt the English version still would do well. We have had in Canada, we've been in provinces there where the government required it to be in French. So the organization did translate it into French, and it was minimally used just for that organization because they legally had to. Broader than that, they didn't find again that it was necessary to do it. So the answer is double, in that certainly willing for it to be. 15 years of trials in the other countries hasn't said it's been economically worth it to invest in actually doing the translations. So.
And therefore so important for that to be a collaborative commitment.
Yes, it is that.
So any remaining questions? Yes, Heidi.
Hi, thank you. I just have a thank you for everything that you've done. We're all so grateful and appreciative.
Thanks,
if you could elaborate a little bit on living your legacy, I think that is so important, and we've only talked about it in less than a few sentences, and I think that is the foundation of everything that you've described. I think it's just important to have it and express it, so if you could talk a little more about it.
How many of us stop at any point during the year and would think, what's my purpose? Why am I here? I had a colleague that I learned this from years ago, that every 4th of July weekend, this was an American, and he was very, very proud of being an American and living here. He'd been in the military and had seen and had to actually fight for the country. So that simply became his benchmark every year. And I had never thought of doing this. But on the 4th of July, every year, he would ask himself these questions. Who am I? What's my purpose? What do I want to be known for this time next year? And without using the language, Heidi, he was actually being very, very conscious that he wanted his brand to now demonstrate who he was today and the reputation that he wanted folks talking about him for years. So it became to that phrase then that started creating of living your legacy versus leading it. So it comes back at multiple levels. First of all, individually, who do I want to be known as? In marketing terms, what's my brand? And if I'm not aware of that, if I'm not clear about that, then I can just be living helter-skelter and being pulled into anything that catches my attention. So then inside of an organization, what do I want my direct reports to be saying about me? Another one of my accidental learnings, I was working with a boss that was the most amazing human being I'd ever met. I had never seen anyone else. And when you walked into his office to talk with him, the entire atmosphere in that room changed. Nothing else was important. I think a lightning storm could have been going outside, and he would still have that complete feeling. It was of warmth. It was of caring. You know, some people try this, and they're staring. He did not have that. You literally were a host in his space. And from that point on, it became the recognition that he did this intentionally. He trained himself to this, where even when he's walking down the hallway and 2 feet of being with someone, he would create this environment around it. So it became for me a model that we can be so unconscious about what we're sending off the vibes and what we're not doing or doing with others, that if I begin to get conscious about it, if I then in an organization demonstrate it and require it of my direct reports, and if I get serious about this, I've had some of the organizations that they'll do offsites, where everyone on the senior team then gets to declare who they are, what their vision is for themselves for this next year, and agree as senior team to hold each other accountable for that, which then keeps blossoming out to going on and on. So it is the awareness of who I am in the organization, who my team is, even to the standpoint of what does this organization stand for. I'd worked several years ago with a global organization whose name you would know, and the previous chairman had kept their light just so focused on the manufacturing of fabulous equipment, and that's all that he wanted broadcast globally. What I learned in working with them, that they had a massive, fabulous foundation that at that point was literally working in Africa with women to educate them so that they could start small little businesses in their villages. And the amount of life-changing work this organization was doing, but no one knew about it. So I happened to be working with the following chairman, and in one of our conversations, we just got to talking about this. And over the years, that organization has brought forward, as part of their commitment to effective development, design of equipment, a parallel that equipment is designed not just for profit for the company and the stockholders, but that equipment is designed to better the life of the people who are using it. So they've been able to build that bridge, and underneath that then gives them a room occasionally to shine the light on the foundation. So that for me was the ultimate recognizing that here's a traditional bottom line focus of Wall Street, here's what our financials are this quarter, here's what I commit to you, with someone who took the heart of the being and said, yes, and here is our subtext of what we're doing for the world. So they really became living that legacy as our language.
Thank you. So I would like to invite my esteemed colleague, yes, I am at doing this, my esteemed, we can edit it out later if you don't like, so my esteemed colleague, friend, and associate, Gary Patterson, who is in fact the host of this institute in Dallas for all of us, and who together we are envisioning, practicing, teaching legacy leadership with your guidance, Jeannine. And so I would like to ask Gary if you have any comments, questions.
Just one small comment. I want to thank you for this time that we've had right now. This is important. I think everybody who goes through legacy leadership would do well to hear where it comes from and what that foundation is. Because to move from here to the heart, to move it out in the passion, That's really what it's all about, and that's where it connects with people. And so thank you for sharing this time with us. We appreciate it. And thank you, Brenda, for letting me just say a word. Good job. Good job. Good job.
Good job.